Hey everybody, this is another 8th grade American history video with your host, me, Coach Goodrich. This is going to be, as you see on the screen, Unit 4, Part 1, which is going to be Constitution to the Monroe Doctrine. So, following the Revolutionary War to about the 1820s, 1820-ish, 1830s in American history. So this is going to be split up into three parts. This is Part 1, Rise of Federalism. Essential questions for the entire unit, not just for Part 1, but for all of Unit 4. What makes the U.S. government so different from many of the old governments of the world? And why does it take so long for the government to get anything done? I know, especially as you get older, you ask that question a lot. So, really, everybody knows the Constitution is the oldest written democratic form of government that is still around today, that's still being utilized. But that was not our first technical government. First government governing document was the Articles of Confederation. We talked about that. That was enacted by the Second Continental Congress during the Revolutionary War. So let's break that down a little bit and why we needed to replace that. So, like I said, enacted by Congress on November 15th, 1777, written during a time of major fear of strong central governments like a monarchy, like a king. We're fighting against the kingdom to give normal people more of a voice. But it was quickly proven inadequate after the war. The strengths of the documents: there was only one real power, Congress, who could declare war, make treaties, interact with foreign countries, pass laws, and operate post offices. Weaknesses: very little strength. The central government didn't have a organized army, no power to enforce laws because they didn't have that army, didn't have a police force, no power to tax, and no central leader. So if you don't have any taxes, you're not going to make any money. Taxes are not fun to pay, trust me. But it is nice to have things like school buildings and streetlights and other government offices, things like that, that they pay for, highways and stuff. 1787, the Constitutional Convention was held in order to try and improve the Articles of Confederation. What started as the opportunity in Philadelphia to try and improve the Articles of Confederation soon became a bloodless revolution that overthrew the Articles of Confederation to start a new, better government. They figured out that, hey, you know what, this sucks, we need to start over. So, four big things we're going to talk about: the Virginia Plan, the New Jersey Plan, the Great or Connecticut Compromise, and then the Three-Fifths Compromise. And they're all going to get wrapped up together. Took place at what is now called Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the Declaration of Independence was read and signed. Before that was called the Carpenter's Hall, I believe. All right, Virginia Plan is brought up by James Madison of Virginia. He wanted three separate branches of government: the legislative, judicial, and then executive. Wanted a bicameral or two-house legislative branch with a House of Representatives and a Senate. Legislative branch is a fancy word for Congress. Population of the states determine the number of representatives in both houses of Congress. So the more people you have that live in your state, the more representatives you have, the more power you have in Congress. And they wanted one executive, a president. Represent every man with a Virginia Plan. The New Jersey Plan was brought up in response, also known as the Small State Plan, brought up by William Paterson of New Jersey. Wanted equal representation in Congress. Population does not matter. Everybody gets 2 or 3 so that the large states don't dominate the smaller states in getting their way in Congress. They also wanted a unicameral Congress, like a unicycle, so you one Congress on 2 different houses. And they wanted multiple executives to spread out the power, not just one president. The New Jersey Plan: big or small, we are all equal. And so these are the big entrenched viewpoints of government, and now we need to see how we can get that to change. The Great or Connecticut Compromise. Compromise between Virginia and New Jersey plans. It was orchestrated by Roger Sherman, representative from Connecticut, which is why it's sometimes called the Connecticut Compromise. They picked up most of the stuff from the large state plan, and that we have 3 branches of government, which we do. Congress and legislature is bicameral with a House of Reps and Senate. Another thing from Virginia plan. In the House of Representatives, representation is based on the population of states. More people equal more representatives. In the Senate, it is equal representation. So that comes directly from the New Jersey or small state plan. Only 2 per state. There's one chief executive, the president, and it also established a Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. So let's put these 2 together. Virginia plan plus New Jersey plan equals the Great Compromise, which is what we get today. Now, the Three-Fifths Compromise, one of the major areas of contention between these two sides was the Three-Fifths Compromise. Really, this is where you see the dividing lines quickly happening between the North and the South. And this is the great failure of the Constitution, is failing to address this situation adequately. Really, the North needed the population of the southern states, and especially Virginia, which was at that time the most populated and thus the most powerful state, but it was also in the South, so they had slaves. The northern states that were also powerful, like New York and Pennsylvania, needed Virginia to sign to get the rest of the states to do it, to go along with it. They needed to have a certain number of states in order to even pass a constitution. So they made a compromise here that would appeal, they hope, to the slaveholding population of the South. Slavery is not explicitly written in the Constitution. It is referred to as a peculiar institution. Southern states did want each individual state to count as a full person for determining representation in Congress, but they did not want slaves to count a number of population for tax reasons. The more people you had in your state, the more taxes you had to pay. They didn't want that, but they did want the voting power and the representative power that came with having them in having slaves counted for population. Northern states wanted the opposite. They did not want each individual slave to count as a full person for determining representation in Congress, but they did want slaves to count number of population for tax reasons. The result was called the Three-Fifths Compromise, which counted the entire population of slaves. You took that number, divided it by 3/5, you have 80% of it for both representation and taxation purposes. But, like I wrote down here, if you're really reading into it, this basically counts all slaves as 3/5 of a person, so less than a full person, which is truly a disgrace. The Constitution has a lot of good things in it. This was one of the things that they missed on. First 5 presidents in order during this time period: George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe. You're going to have to memorize them. Here we go. George Washington, the GOAT, the only unanimously elected president in U.S. history, had the opportunity to be a king, to be referred to as Your Majesty, Your Highness. He turned that down and decided to go with the very more lowbrow, I should say, very more common Mr. President, which is still what we call him today. Set major precedents for how this country was going to be run. Only 2 terms in office when he could have stayed in there forever. He selected a cabinet of advisors to head up different departments and to give him advice. He declared neutrality in most foreign conflicts. We've kind of gotten away from that one. Went to Congress to deliver the State of the Union instead of having all of the senators and congressmen come to the White House, etc. Or at that time, the Executive Mansion. The White House was not a thing yet. And either, if you look at any number of lists, the number 1 or number 2 greatest president of all time. And that's usually divided between Washington and Lincoln. And that's not up for debate. Once again, yeah, see, we've almost elevated him to like a mythical stature in the country. Number 2, John Adams. He was the 2nd president and the 1st vice president. He was also the first person to really belong to a political party known as Federalists. Wanted a very strong central government, kind of in keeping with what the British government was. He wanted to ally the United States with Britain. He did a lot of good things. His presidency is not very fondly remembered, but as a founding father, he was vital to the beginning of this country. Unfortunately, he is mostly remembered for the Alien and Sedition Acts, wanting to keep foreigners really from France out of the country. Number 3, Thomas Jefferson, another truly great president, 3rd president of the United States and father of the Declaration of Independence. He was the 2nd vice president. He was a anti-federalist, or what became known as a Democratic Republican, which is very confusing, but just kind of think of it more of like a Republican sense today. Wanted less powerful national and federal government and more powerful states. So not so much central power, more power diffused among the people. He comes up with the idea of nullification, that states could refuse to follow, cancel, or nullify federal laws that they don't agree with. This doesn't usually go over well. Wanted to ally more with France as opposed to Great Britain. He spent a lot of time in France as an ambassador, so that might be where that came from. And he is also responsible for buying the Louisiana Territory from France for about $3 million, which doubled the U.S. in size. James Madison, the fourth president, known as the father of the Constitution, for orchestrating the Virginia Plan, which the vast majority of the Constitution is taken from. Another Democratic Republican and a very good friend of Thomas Jefferson. He led the country through the War of 1812. And then James Monroe, the fifth president, very popular. His time in office is known as the era of good feelings. He established the Monroe Doctrine, which we will talk more about. The last major thing that we get is a court case, Marbury versus Madison in 1803. This is the first major court case, national court case that the Supreme Court agreed to take since its inception in with the Constitutional Convention. This really gave the Supreme Court some power. To establish a principle of what is called judicial review, which gave the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, the power to overturn laws that they found unconstitutional. This finally gave the Supreme Court system some power as a way to check the powers of the other two branches of government. So if a law comes in place and it has to get checked out by the President and by the Supreme Court can say, no, this does not meet the certain criteria of the Constitution. This is no longer law. It's unconstitutional. So it gave them a little bit of fighting power to use against the other branches of government. It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. In other words, to interpret the laws. Marbury vs. Madison, 1803. And then we got the War of 1812, 1812 to 1814, sometimes referred to as the Second War for U.S. independence. This was done because of the U.S. response to the British impressments of U.S. sailors. Impressment does not mean like, oh, hey, you are impressing me. No, what this means is, in this case, that the British sailors and sea captains would sail up to U.S. ships, board them, take them over, and force U.S. sailors to sail for Great Britain. So basically kidnapping them or shanghaiing them. The U.S. obviously does not like this because you're losing soldiers, but also it's really harmful for trade. So we have another war with Great Britain. There's three main fronts: Canada, the East Coast, really Upper East Coast, and Mississippi River. Canada, the U.S. failed miserably to kick the British out of Canada. They did establish the official border between the U.S. and Canada in the far north. The East Coast, the British destroyed Washington, D.C. They burned it to the ground, but were stopped at Baltimore. Fort McHenry, FSK, as Francis Scott Key writes his Star-Spangled Banner from his viewpoint on a prison ship out in the harbor. And then number three, the Mississippi River down in Louisiana. Andrew Jackson leads the U.S. Army in defense of New Orleans, beats the British soundly. However, they had not received word that 2 weeks prior the peace treaty had already been signed, so they were not supposed to be fighting. Whoopsies. But this makes Andrew Jackson a national hero. The Treaty of Ghent in Belgium formally ends the war. There's Andrew Jackson there. The British Army burning Washington, D.C. and the White House, and you guys will watch that. And then Francis Scott Key, who actually did not write it from up here, as he sees the Star-Spangled Banner, our flag in the distance. He wrote it from a very nasty prison hold on the bottom of the ship. Let's talk about the Monroe Doctrine, and then we should be getting close to being done, I believe. Brought about by President Monroe in 1823. This was after Florida is bought from Spain in the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819. Brief summary. Monroe declares to all European powers that further colonization of other countries in the Western Hemisphere is off limits, and that we will fight to keep Europe on their side of the Atlantic Ocean. Basically, stay on your side of the pond or else. Which is big talk for a country that's only 30 years old. Alright, guys. There will be a mini quiz that I will come up with that'll be online for you guys, and you will take it on your Google Docs or in your Google Classroom, but I'll put that up here soon. And I look forward to talking about all this stuff with you a little bit later. Appreciate it.